I remember the rain that night, soft at first, then hammering the roof like distant whispers trying to get in. The road ahead vanished into a silver fog, and the trees leaned closer, their branches scraping against the windshield like skeletal fingers. Everything smelled wet, earth, pine, and something metallic. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. Every turn I took seemed familiar, yet wrong, as if the world itself had shifted without telling me. Streetlights flickered, humming with a faint static that made the hairs on my arms rise. Somewhere behind me a shadow moved, but I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, every nerve alert. That's when I saw it. The highway stretched empty, pale under the weak, flickering glow of a dying street lamp. The night was thick with fog, damp against my skin, smelling faintly of wet asphalt and rust. I stepped off the cracked pavement, shoes whispering against the gravel, toward the abandoned rest stop. The doors hung crooked on their hinges, groaning when the wind touched them. Inside, the air was colder, stiller, heavier, like it had been waiting. I could feel the dust clinging to my lungs, fine and dry, with a whisper of something old, metallic. A mirror hung crooked above the sinks, streaked and fogged from years of neglect. I pressed my palm to the glass. The fog clouded, and for a second, I thought I saw more than my own reflection. It wasn't quite right. The shape behind my eyes lingered longer than it should have. A shadow moved where it shouldn't. Not me. Something else, a soft knock, hesitant. Plastic bottles rattled somewhere far behind me. I turned. Slow. Nothing. The dim light overhead flickered. Shadows stretched and twitched along the walls. They seemed to lean toward me, patient, watching. I could feel the hum of the old wiring through the soles of my shoes, vibrating in my bones. The mirror fogged again, and I swear, my reflection blinked when I did not. The edges of the glass warped, bending the light in pale streaks. A cold breath brushed the back of my neck, low, wet, a whisper of my own name. It rolled over the tiles like water, sinking into every crack, every hollow corner. I tried to tell myself it was the wind or the echo of dripping pipes, but my chest tightened, slow and relentless. I couldn't step back. Curiosity anchored me, a silent insistence. The air smelled faintly of mildew, the tang of rust, the subtle decay of time itself. Each inhale brought it closer. Each exhale left me shivering. A shadow detached from the far corner. It didn't move like a person. It flickered, twisted, almost liquid. The mirror reflected it too, though the floor behind me remained empty. I leaned closer. My breath fogged the glass again, white and soft, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw a face pressed against the other side. Pale, wet, impossible. The knock came again, firmer this time, closer. But the tiles behind me were empty, and the silence of the room swallowed any explanation whole. I could hear soft footsteps, or was it the scrape of shoes on old linoleum? They circled me, careful, patient. The hum in the walls grew louder, vibrating in my ears, my chest, my teeth. I could taste it. Iron, wet stone, cold. The light flickered again, and the shadow jumped across the wall faster than anything natural. It paused, mirrored in the glass. I froze. My own eyes caught mine. But not exactly mine. A thin, shivering dread seeped into my spine. It was pale, silent. Patient. It didn't hurry. It waited. I wanted to step back, to flee, to close my eyes. But the mirror held me. My reflection, or what wanted to be mine, stared back. The room breathed around me, slow, almost tender. Dust floated in a single sunbeam I didn't remember seeing before. The whisper of my name curled again at the edge of my hearing. I exhaled. Slow. Soft. The air was thick in my throat, sweet with fear, metallic with old decay. Every hair on my arms lifted, every nerve throbbed. The shadow receded. The mirror cleared slightly. And yet, the emptiness behind me felt alive. I stepped away. The echo of the knock lingered in my chest. My reflection followed, just for a moment, a flicker of pale, silent dread. And then only the fog remained. Rain tapped against the roof. Soft at first, then insistent, like fingernails tracing a rhythm only I could feel. The cabin smelled of damp wood and cold stone. Smoke from the dying fire curled in thin, lazy spirals, carrying the faint scent of ash and wet pine. I sat in the corner, shoulders hunched, listening, each raindrop. A syllable, a pause, a whisper, almost forming words I couldn't understand. I tilted my head, heart quiet but alert, straining for sense in the murmur. Outside, the trees bent and swayed. Their limbs twisted like fingers scraping the dark sky. Shadows reached across the walls, long and uneven, stretching where no light should be. The wind pressed against the windows. It moved the curtains in slow, deliberate arcs, and sometimes in the rustle of leaves and the pounding of rain, I thought I heard movement beyond the door, just beyond, a step. Or was it the sway of the trees? The floorboards were silent, but the space around me felt alive. I shivered. The air smelled of cold earth, of wet bark, and something faintly metallic, like a coin dropped in a puddle. A brush at my shoulder, cold, hard, gone too fast. I froze, breath shallow, tasting the damp wood and fear. The fire's glow trembled across the walls. I could see the shadows dance, small, liquid, unnatural. The rain changed pace. A soft stutter, a heavy beat, then a hollow pause. It pressed against the roof, against my ears, filling the room with its insistence, almost like words again, a language I couldn't quite reach. I leaned closer to the wall, fingers pressed to the rough timber. The wood was wet, sticky with condensation, echoing the chill of the air. I could feel the room breathe around me, another brush at my shoulder. Or maybe memory or imagination. Either way, it left me stiff, alert. The shadows didn't stop moving. They stretched across the floor, curling at the edges of the firelight. I wanted to call out. My voice caught in my throat. Even the wind seemed to hush at that thought. Outside, the branches scraped and rattled. A single leaf hit the window with a soft thud. The pause after it felt too long. I closed my eyes. The rhythm of rain became a pulse inside my chest. I could taste it. Cold, metallic, wet. Each drop a reminder that I was alone. But not entirely. A low hum entered the silence. Not the wind, not the storm. Something small, persistent, circling the corners of the room. I felt it in my bones. The door shivered. Just a breath of movement, almost imperceptible. My shoulder tingled. The brush again, or maybe nothing at all. The uncertainty was sharper than any fear. I stayed still. The rain slowed. The shadows remained, frozen for a heartbeat. Then stretched again, long, twisting, pale. Time became a soft fog. Minutes, hours, I couldn't tell. The storm whispered. The trees whispered. And the cabin held its silence between them. I could only sit, alone, and feel the weight of something unseen, patient, watching. The cold lingered in my shoulder, in my chest, in the spaces just beyond my sight. The rain continued, steady, insistent, almost like words I almost understood, and I waited, listening, feeling the room breathe, knowing I was alone, yet not entirely. The road stretched thin under a pale moon. Fog lay thick across the fields, cold and damp against my skin. The night smelled of wet grass and distant smoke, faint and clinging. Streetlights lined the road, distant pinpricks of yellow, dim and steady. But one hummed louder than the rest, low and insistent like it was breathing. Its circle of light pooled over the asphalt, pale and unsteady. I stepped into it. The hum pressed against my chest, vibrating softly through my bones. Shadows flickered at the edges, twitching in shapes my mind couldn't name. Figures moved there, or I thought they did. When I blinked, they were gone. The fog thickened, curling across the road in slow waves. It swallowed fences, trees, familiar bends I knew like the back of my hand. The world shrank, folded inward, leaving only the road and the humming light. I could hear my own breath, sharp and wet in the silence. And beneath it, a whisper, soft, wavering, as if the streetlight itself was speaking. The figures returned, fleeting. Tall, thin, indistinct. They melted into the mist whenever I dared to focus. I paused. The asphalt was slick beneath my shoes, cold seeping through. The air tasted faintly of ozone and wet iron. The hum thrummed against my eardrums, steady, insistent, almost alive. I took another step. The fog shifted with me, curling around ankles, crawling along the road. The figures drifted closer. Or maybe I drifted toward them. I couldn't tell. A branch scraped the edge of the road. The sound was soft, deliberate. Shadows leapt at the corner of my vision. A shiver ran down my spine. The hum grew louder, but not in a painful way. It was mesmerizing, hypnotic, drawing my eyes to the light, drawing me. The whispers threaded through it, a low vibration in my chest, almost words. I couldn't understand them. I blinked again. The figures vanished. The road seemed emptier, but the fog still thickened. Everything beyond the pale circle felt distant, unreal. I moved forward. The hum followed, alive in the mist, pressing in on my shoulders. The light flickered. Shadows curled beneath it, twisting shapes I couldn't name. I stopped. The road was silent except for the hum and the faint whispering. The fog swallowed the edges of everything familiar. I felt smaller. Alone. The figures appeared once more, just at the edge of the light. I could see outlines of faces, perhaps, but nothing solid. Each blink erased them, leaving only pale emptiness. I wanted to turn back. But the fog had erased the way I came. The road behind me was gone. Only the streetlight hummed, its circle a fragile island in the mist. I breathed. The air was damp and heavy in my lungs. The hum pressed against my chest. The fog curled around my ankles, and I realized I couldn't tell where the road ended, or if it ever had. I kept walking, slowly, tentatively. The figures faded again, the whisper lingered, and the fog swallowed everything familiar. The light pulsed, steady and pale, drawing me onward, alone, humming, uncertain. The road, endless. The road stretched empty, slick with rain, disappearing into shadows. Fog clung to the trees, curling around trunks and branches, damp against my skin. Each breath tasted of wet asphalt and cold metal, sharp and lingering. A single car appeared, headlights cutting through the darkness. They glowed pale and harsh, spilling onto the road in long, trembling beams. Rain bounced against the hood, scattering diamonds of light across the wet asphalt. I watched it approach. A ripple of warmth spread through my chest, soft, fleeting, then vanished as suddenly as it came, leaving cold dread crawling along my spine. I thought I saw a figure inside. A hand lifted, wavering, waving, or maybe it was the reflection of rain on glass. My eyes strained against the glare. The tires hummed, steady and relentless, echoing in the emptiness. I expected the sound to fade as the car passed. But it lingered. The road behind was empty. No taillights, no shape, only the echo of movement, soft and unyielding. The air smelled of rain and earth, tangy and wet. A shiver ran down my neck, cold pressing through my jacket. The headlights carved the fog into stark lines, slicing shadows into the puddles. Each ripple of water reflected something, almost alive. The car slowed. Or maybe I had stopped. The moment stretched, thin and fragile, like glass about to shatter. The figure, was it waving again? My chest tightened. The warmth returned, subtle, fleeting. Then gone, I stepped forward. The tire's hum followed me, impossible, persistent. Shadows of trees reached across the road. Twisting, curling, dissolving into fog. I could taste the wet air, metallic and heavy, each inhale pulling me deeper into the quiet. The road seemed to stretch forever, pale light flickering across every puddle. I wanted to run, but my feet remained rooted. A soft ripple of wind carried a faint whisper. It tangled with the sound of rain, rising, falling, teasing understanding. The warmth had vanished completely now. Only cold lingered, clutching my spine, sinking into the edges of my awareness. The car passed completely. No sound of tires, no glow, only the pale road, fog curling along the edges. The shadows seemed to twitch, impatient. The echo of the warmth lingered in my chest like a memory I couldn't place. I exhaled. The breath came slow, wet, smelling of earth and rain. The road ahead disappeared into fog. The world felt empty, hollowed. I took another step. Alone. The cold pressed against my skin. The fog swallowed every familiar mark, and I realized the warmth had been a promise that never returned. Only the whisper of rain, the echo of tires, and the pale light that had vanished. Alone. Cold. Watching. The pine forest smelled of resin and wet earth. Wind whispered through the needles, brushing my skin with a soft, restless chill. Darkness pooled between the trees, thick and patient. I sat by the small fire, the flame trembling, casting long, twitching shadows. Every rustle of the branches made me turn. I could taste the smoke and the sharp tang of cold in my mouth. Something flickered between the trunks. A pale shape, thin and unmoving. It vanished when I blinked. But the space where it had been seemed different. The wind carried whispers. Soft, tangled words I couldn't understand. They threaded through the pines, brushing my ears, settling in the hollow of my chest. A branch snapped. Or maybe it was closer. The forest seemed alive, bending and twisting, watching. Every movement felt deliberate. I could feel it, following me. A rustle here, a shadow there. Every step I took was mirrored in the hush of the needles. The flame flickered again, pale light spilling onto damp moss. The figure, or what I thought was a figure, shifted. Not quite solid. Not quite gone. The air smelled faintly of pine sap and wet stone. Each breath tasted of cold night and fear pressing softly against my lungs. The wind carried something else, subtle, metallic, like a memory I couldn't place. I wanted to move, to leave, to dissolve into the forest floor. But the forest leaned closer, patient, quiet. The rustling followed. It circled. It waited. I saw it once more. Between two pines, pale and thin, just a flicker and gone. My chest tightened. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, in my fingers, in the soles of my feet. The fire's glow dimmed. Shadows lengthened. Silence pressed against me, heavier than the wind or the dark. No movement. Only the memory of motion. Only the rustling that could be the trees, or not. I exhaled, slow, soft. The whispers faded, but the forest remained awake, alone, watching, waiting. I regretted every step that had led me here. The fire died. The wind settled. The pines stood rigid, patient, and I realized the rustling would never stop. It would follow, always. The lake lay still, dark as ink under the night sky. Stars trembled on its surface, scattered and fragile. The air smelled of wet earth and cold water, sharp against my skin. I knelt at the edge. The ripples shifted, slow, deliberate, like the lake was breathing. Each wave lapped softly, brushing against my fingers. The water smelled faintly metallic, like rain over stone. And then I saw it. A pale face, pressed in the ripples, not mine. Eyes that held stillness, endless and quiet. The reflection moved differently than the water. Slow, fluid, almost deliberate. It blinked when I did not, and I felt a chill curl around my spine. I wanted to look away, but awe anchored me. The surface of the lake shimmered under the moon, each wave beckoning closer. I could hear the soft sigh of water against reeds, each exhale drawing me in. The pale face shifted, its lips parted faintly. A whisper of breath that wasn't mine seemed to brush my cheek. The air tasted damp and metallic, and I shivered, both afraid and captivated. The water's surface rippled again. Reflections twisted, the moonlight scattering in patterns that felt deliberate, alive. Every wave called softly, tugging at something I could not name. I leaned closer. The cold seeped through my jeans, up my thighs, sharp and alive. The face mirrored me almost, but not quite. Eyes too still, skin too pale. A beauty that was impossible, unreal. I traced the edge of the water with my fingers. Ripples expanded slowly, swallowing the reflection and then bringing it back. It hovered just beneath the surface, patient, waiting. I breathed. The night smelled of pine and water, damp and soft. My own pulse thrummed in my ears, slow and hypnotic. The lake shifted again. The pale face lifted slightly, as if acknowledging my presence. I felt a tug of something deep in my chest, curiosity, fear, awe. The water licked at my fingers, cold and living. The reflection smiled faintly, impossibly. I drew back, trembling. The moon's reflection danced across the ripples. The pale face remained, constant, patient. The lake seemed to breathe, soft waves curling toward the shore. I could have stayed there forever, alone with the water, the stars, the impossible face. But a quiet unease pressed at the edges of wonder. Something about it felt eternal, waiting beyond understanding. I exhaled slowly. Cold air filled my lungs, mixed with the scent of wet stone and pine. The water shimmered, rippling gently as though breathing. The pale face lingered, almost inviting, almost alive. I stepped back from the edge. The lake remained still, endless. The reflection watched, silent, patient. And I walked away, heart tight, senses alive, carrying quiet awe and lingering unease. Rain clung to the windshield, fine and persistent, turning the world outside into a blur of gray. The car smelled faintly of wet leather and cold metal. I sat alone, hands resting on the wheel, listening. A transistor radio crackled in the back seat. Static swelled, low and insistent. And then words. Not the station I had tuned. Faint, garbled, almost human. The mist outside thickened, hugging the glass. Tiny droplets tracing slow patterns down the pane. Shadows stretched with every blink. Twisting, leaning, reaching in the pale light of passing lamps. I leaned back slightly, breath shallow, tasting cold metal and damp air. The radio whispered again. Words I couldn't understand, phrases that seemed to echo inside the car itself. The static trembled with them, low, steady, deliberate. Outside, the trees moved in slow, unnatural arcs, their silhouettes bent against the mist, limbs curling like fingers. The wet road reflected them, doubling, twisting them in ways my eyes struggled to process. The radio hummed, a low vibration that pressed against my chest. I wanted to turn it off, but curiosity held me still. The static carried a rhythm, a voice threading through the white noise, patient and teasing. Raindrops slid down the glass in soft streams, catching the weak glow of streetlights. The mist pressed in, cold and sticky, brushing against my cheeks through the cracked window. Shadows flickered in rhythm with each blink, stretching toward the corners of the car, then melting into the fog. I tried to focus outside. The road was empty, silent except for the rain and the low hum of the radio. But the shapes in the mist moved, subtly, as if aware of me. Each glance brought new distortion, new uncertainty. I could feel the vibration of the words in my chest, mingling with the chill seeping through the metal and glass. The radio whispered again, soft, unintelligible, closer somehow. My hands trembled lightly, cold pressing through my skin, wet clinging to the collar of my jacket. The mist thickened further. The world outside flattened into gray and shadow, familiar shapes lost in a haze. I blinked. And the shadows stretched differently this time, longer, patient. I could smell rain on asphalt and wet pine, carried faintly through the fog. The static buzzed in my ears. The words teased, rhythmic, low, just beyond understanding. I shifted in the seat. The car felt smaller. The rain whispered against the roof, steady, almost intentional. Shadows moved again, subtle, fleeting, impossible to follow. I exhaled slowly. The radio hummed. Mist pressed against the windshield. Shadows stretched. And I sat, heart steadying, mind alert, alone in the quiet tension of it all. Curiosity held me in place. Dread lingered softly, pressing at the edges of awareness. The world beyond the glass felt both infinite and impossibly small. The radio whispered. The mist clung. The shadows waited. Rain hammered against the window, soft at first, then insistent, masking the world outside. The air smelled of wet wood and ozone, thick and pressing against my skin. I leaned close to the glass, watching the blur of shadows and droplets. And then, a whisper. My name soft, curling through the room like the wind itself was speaking. I froze. The cold pressed along my spine, damp and electric. Outside, the storm hid everything. Branches lashed and twisted, blurred shapes in the gray mist. Yet the feeling of being watched didn't fade. It lingered, patient, heavy. A silhouette appeared, just for a heartbeat. Tall, thin, impossible to hold in focus, then gone. The blink of an eye and the world returned to rain and shadow. I pressed my forehead to the glass. Cold seeped through, wet and sharp. The window hummed faintly with the storm's rhythm, each vibration threading through my chest. Every droplet seemed alive, moving in patterns that felt deliberate. The whisper returned. Not loud, not clear, but certain. My name, low, intimate, curling around my ears. I could taste it in the air, metallic and damp. I backed away slightly. The room smelled faintly of smoke and wet plaster. Shadows twisted along the walls, drawn long and thin by the pale flash of lightning. The storm pressed, insistent, patient, like it had its own awareness. I blinked. The silhouette returned briefly, glimpsed between the rolling shadows of rain and tree. It didn't move like a person. It moved differently, fluid, patient, watching. The whisper softened, threading into the hum of the storm. Cold air brushed my neck. I wanted to speak, to call out, but my throat caught, tight and wet. The rain clung to the glass, tiny rivulets carving slow paths. Each one seemed to stretch, linger, almost reaching for me. I could feel the storm's pulse through the pane, through the wood, through the silence between each crash of water. I took a slow breath. The room smelled faintly of damp wood, of fear pressed into corners. The silhouette flickered again, pale, patient, impossible to hold. And I realized the watching wasn't just outside. It was in the space between the rain, between the shadows, threading through the silence. I stepped back. The window hummed. The whisper lingered faintly. The storm continued, relentless and intimate, and I sat, listening, alone. Cold. Watched. And the rain blurred the world beyond, leaving only quiet, lingering fear. The park was empty, fog thick across the grass and paths. The air smelled of wet leaves and cold earth clinging to my skin. Moonlight filtered weakly through the mist, pale and hesitant. A bench appeared ahead, alone, framed in silver-gray fog. Something pulled me toward it. I couldn't stop myself. Each step echoed softly in the still night. I sat. The wood was cold and damp beneath me. My breath fogged in the air. Each heartbeat seemed louder than the last, hammering against the quiet. Shadows stretched across the misty ground. They twisted and leaned in ways the light couldn't explain. When I looked directly, they vanished, only to return just beyond my vision, patient and still. The fog shifted. A chill pressed against my shoulders, seeping into my clothes. I could feel it in my fingers, in the soles of my feet, in the shallow pull of breath. The park smelled faintly of pine and wet metal, damp and sharp. Each rustle of a distant branch sounded deliberate. I could hear the fog moving, almost alive, pressing against the edges of the bench and the path. I tried to focus outside the mist. Shapes formed and dissolved with each blink. I could feel eyes, or maybe just presence, watching from the folds of fog. My heartbeat steadied slightly. But the unease lingered, soft, patient. The bench felt like it belonged to the night itself. Sitting here, I was part of it, yet separate, fragile. The shadows leaned closer. I could see them stretch toward the edges of the path, touching the fog lightly. No sound but the slow rhythm of my pulse and the occasional sigh of distant wind. I pressed my hands to the damp wood, the texture rough, wet, grounding me. Yet my mind floated in the fog, following the shifting shapes, following the spaces between them. I blinked again. The shadows vanished. The fog thickened. The bench remained, alone, waiting. A soft rustle reached my ears. Not loud, not certain, but deliberate. I held my breath. The world felt suspended, patient, full of anticipation. I exhaled slowly. Cold air filled my lungs, tasting faintly of wet earth and night. The fog clung to the ground, the shadows to the mist. And I sat, quiet, aware, held in the soft, uneasy rhythm of the park. Alone. The bench before me. Shadows stretching, twisting, vanishing. And the anticipation lingered, patient, waiting for something I could not see. The motel smelled of stale carpet and damp air, heavy and unwelcoming. The hallway stretched ahead, pale light flickering rhythmically from overhead bulbs. Each pulse cast shadows that shivered along the walls. I walked slowly. Soft footsteps echoed behind me, but not my own. They paused when I paused, pressed close, then receded, patient and deliberate. Doors lined the corridor, paint chipped, hinges groaning. One creaked open on its own. A breath of cold air spilled into the hall, carrying the scent of wet wood and something faintly metallic. The flickering lights cast long, uneven shadows. They curled and twisted across the floor, stretching toward the ceiling. I felt them brush against my ankles, insistent, teasing. A low hum thrummed in the air, vibrating through the walls and into my chest. It was steady, almost alive, threading into the silence between my steps. I could taste it in the back of my throat, faintly bitter, electric. I moved closer to the first open door. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and something old, something patient. Shadows curled in the corners, melting into the flicker of light. I blinked, and the shapes shifted, impossible to track. Footsteps approached again. Not mine. Closer. Then receding, slow and deliberate. I leaned against the wall. Cold paint pressed into my shoulder. The hum remained, threading through the flicker of the lights. The hallway seemed to breathe, stretching, waiting. Another door creaked open, and I could see the dark inside, patient and still. I could feel the air shift, cold brushing along my neck and arms. The shadows moved again, twitching, curling toward the center of the hall. I tried to steady my breathing. The carpet smelled damp and faintly of mildew. The hum pressed against my chest. The footsteps whispered along the length of the corridor. I stepped forward. The flicker of light drew my eyes in rhythmic pulses. Shadows stretched long, thin, impossibly patient. The doors remained open, silent, watching. The hallway pressed close, air heavy and damp. The hum threaded through the silence. I could feel it vibrating under my feet, through the soles of my shoes. Another pause, another flicker. Footsteps receded. The doors stood patient, the shadows still twitching, and I waited, alone, aware, held in the rhythm of the motel, in the hush of the unseen. The high-rise felt empty, hollow against the night. The air smelled faintly of damp concrete and cold metal. I could hear the hum of the city far below, muffled, distant. Water dripped from the ceiling, irregular, patient, each drop landing in the puddles on the floor. The puddles shifted slightly with each impact, edges curling, shapes bending. Shadows crawled along the walls, stretching thin and long. They twisted over corners, climbing steadily, patient, aware. The faint scent of wet stone and rust pressed against my nose. I leaned closer to the largest puddle. The reflection shimmered with the rhythm of the dripping, and then a face, pale, faint, emerging from the water as if it had always been there. It blinked when I did not. The puddle trembled. Each ripple stretched the reflection, bending the features into shapes impossible to hold. The ceiling continued its slow, irregular drip. I could hear it echo softly through the empty room. The hum of the city below pressed gently against the back of my neck. The air tasted faintly metallic, mingled with damp plaster. I could feel cold seeping through the soles of my shoes, climbing my legs. The reflection remained, patient, silent, watching. I stepped back slightly. Shadows shifted again, crawling along the floor and walls. Every corner seemed to hold a presence, patient, waiting. A single drip landed, heavy, echoing. The puddles writhed faintly, edges curling. The face shimmered again, close enough to reach but impossible to touch. I pressed my palms to the cold floor, grounding myself. The water smelled faintly of rain and metal, sharp and insistent. The reflection did not move, except with the rhythm of the drops. I exhaled slowly. Each breath tasted of damp air and stone. The shadows leaned closer. The puddles shifted imperceptibly, alive, patient. I stepped back, feeling the emptiness of the high-rise around me. The drip continued, irregular, hypnotic. The reflection lingered, pale and impossible, watching without eyes. Alone, cold. The air hummed with something unseen, and I stood still, held in quiet dread, aware that the water remembered me long after I would leave. The road was familiar, lined with trees heavy with the damp scent of autumn. The air smelled of wet asphalt and cold leaves, thick and slow. Fog drifted low, curling along the edges of the pavement. I saw the house ahead, the one I had passed 100 times, familiar, pale under the waning light. And then it vanished. Blink once, and it was gone. Fog rolled in fast, unnatural, swallowing the shapes of trees and road signs. It pressed against the car, cold, dense, almost alive. I could taste it in the air, damp and metallic, The road beneath the tires hummed faintly, smooth and endless. Shadows bent in the mist, curling, stretching, almost teasing my gaze. Each blink revealed nothing. Then a hint, a trace, as if the house might return. A soft laugh drifted through the fog, high, distant, fading quickly. Not loud enough to locate, yet present, patient. It lingered in the corners of my ears, brushing the edges of my thoughts. The air thickened, pressing against my skin, my chest, my back. Each breath tasted damp and heavy, filled with wet leaves and something unplaceable. The fog shifted with subtle rhythm, like it had awareness, like it moved with intent. I slowed the car. Headlights barely touched the mist, pale light scattering into nothing. The shapes along the roadside seemed to stretch and vanish, patient and silent. I could feel it, the road, the fog, the memory of the house breathing around me. Curiosity pressed at my chest, mingled with something colder, something waiting. The laughter returned briefly, a soft echo, then dissolved into the night. I blinked again. The house was gone. Only fog remained, pressing at the edges of vision. Shadows leaned closer, patient, impossible to track. The tires whispered against the asphalt. The hum low and steady. I could feel the mist sliding across my hands through the wheel, cold and wet. The fog seemed to pulse with life, slow and deliberate, curling around the car. A fleeting trace of the house appeared for a heartbeat. Windows glimmering, roof pale under the moon. And then nothing. The air held stillness, thick and waiting. I exhaled slowly. Breath mingled with the cold fog, filling the small space of the car. The laughter faded completely. Only the road, endless and quiet, stretched forward. Alone, curious, uneasy. And the vanishing house lingered in my mind. A memory that might return, a shadow in the fog. Patient and impossible to hold. The road ended abruptly, gravel crunching under tires. Ahead, a gate stood, rusted, stubborn, framed in fog that clung to the ground. The air smelled of wet metal and moss, thick and heavy. I stepped closer. The hinges creaked without touch, slow and deliberate. The sound lingered, bending against the fog, reverberating along the gravel path. Shadows twisted near the gate. Faces seemed to form within the gray mist, fleeting, impossible to hold. Eyes flickered, shapes blurred, then disappeared when I blinked. The wind carried a faint rustle of leaves, soft footsteps I did not make. I pressed my palms to the cool metal of the gate. It vibrated faintly under my fingers, alive, patient. Fog swirled around me, thickening, curling, almost wrapping my legs in chill. The air tasted faintly metallic, damp, pressing against my teeth and tongue. A shadow shifted behind a tree, long and thin, bending toward the path. I stepped closer again. The gate moved slightly, a slow arc, as if inviting me or warning me. Faces appeared in the mist more clearly now, pale, patient, watching. The sound of the hinges echoed. My breath felt loud, warm against the cold fog. The gravel beneath my boots pressed unevenly, grounding me in a world that seemed half dream, half shadow. I raised my hand, nearly touching the gate, and something stopped me. Not a voice, not a hand, just presence, heavy and certain. The fog pressed closer, and the shadows danced at its edges. The rusted metal gleamed faintly in the pale light, slick with moisture. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my ears, steady, insistent. I exhaled slowly. The gate stood, patient. The fog shifted, curling faces into abstract shapes again. I could hear nothing but the rustle of unseen leaves, the quiet hum of air moving through the hinges. I did not move forward. Yet curiosity pressed against me, cold and bright. The shadows leaned, the mist breathed, and the gate waited. Alone, tense, suspended between fear and curiosity. And I stood there, held in the patient, unreadable rhythm of the rusted gate. The trail narrowed, lined with tall pines that pressed against the sky. The air smelled of damp needles and earth, heavy and still. I could feel the ground soft beneath my boots, uneven, alive with hidden moisture. Silence fell suddenly. No birds, no wind. Just the quiet, thick and patient, pressing into my ears and chest. Shadows moved between the trees. long, thin shapes twisting along trunks and roots. Each time I focused, they vanished, folding into the stillness like smoke. A whisper brushed my ear. Soft, fleeting, impossible to place. Not words. Just presence, curling around the hollow of my ear, leaving cold trails along my neck. The forest seemed suspended. Even the fog hung motionless, pale light caught in its strands. The scent of wet bark and moss was stronger now, sharp and grounding. I stepped forward slowly. The soft crunch of needles beneath my boots felt too loud, echoing. Shadows stretched, bending in ways the light couldn't follow. Each blink erased them, then they returned, patient, waiting. The whisper came again, just behind me. I held my breath. The silence was so deep, so total, that each inhalation sounded intrusive, loud against the stillness. Fog swirled faintly around the trees, curling and twisting, forming shapes that teased recognition. I could feel them watching, patient, impossible to define. The forest seemed aware of my presence, shifting imperceptibly with every step. My hands brushed the bark of a tree, rough, cold, grounding. The mist hung in the air, damp against my skin, brushing my cheeks, settling in my hair. Each footstep pressed softly into the muted earth, and yet the shadows followed, just beyond reach. The trail stretched endlessly ahead. The shapes vanished and returned in the blink of an eye. The whisper lingered at the edge of hearing, unplaceable, patient. I stopped. The silence pressed around me like water. The forest held me in quiet isolation, aware and attentive, alone, surrounded by shapes that would not stay, whispers that would not speak, and the soft, eerie stillness of the woods. The path wound ahead, lined with candles flickering in pale, unsteady light. The air smelled faintly of wax and damp earth, heavy with stillness. Each step pressed softly into the dirt, pressing against the quiet night. Shadows moved differently here. They stretched, curled, bending as if alive. Faces appeared in the darkness, pale, unreadable, watching without eyes. I could hear the soft hiss of flames, mingling with the faint rustle of leaves. The scent of melted wax mixed with the damp air, sharp and grounding. Each step felt heavier, pressing against my chest as much as the ground. The candlelight trembled, casting shifting shapes across the path. The faces in the darkness tilted, vanishing when I tried to focus. I blinked, and they returned, patient, still, impossible to reach. The wind whispered faintly, brushing across the path and my cheeks. A faint hum threaded through the air, low and persistent, pressing against the soles of my boots. The shadows curled closer, just at the edge of vision, never fully present. I paused. The scent of smoke lingered, faint and sweet, mixing with damp leaves. The pale faces blinked, vanished, returned in the flicker of candlelight. Every step forward felt heavier. The air pressed against my skin, thick, almost tactile, carrying whispers I could not catch. The shadows leaned closer, patient, still, stretching toward me in quiet anticipation. I exhaled slowly. The path wound onward, each candle flickering in rhythm with my heartbeat. The faces remained, faint, impossible, watching without eyes, alone, careful, curious. And the weight of the candle-lit path pressed softly, insistent into my chest. The staircase stretched upward, carpet worn thin under my feet. The air smelled faintly of dust, old varnish, and cold metal. Each step pressed softly, echoing in the empty hotel, slow and deliberate. Footsteps followed, soft, light. But mine were the only ones moving. Each echo lingered, folding over itself, patient. The hum of the air conditioning filled the space. Low, steady, almost musical. It twisted subtly, forming words I couldn't understand. A voice behind the hum, brushing the edge of thought, unplaceable. Shadows climbed the walls. They stretched, thin and twisting, moving against the light in ways the eye could not track. They curled over corners, leaned along the ceiling, patient and alive. I could taste the cold in the air, metallic and damp, pressing against my tongue. The carpet pressed softly beneath my boots, muffled, grounding me in the emptiness. The echoes followed each step, patient, insistent, teasing my senses. I paused. The hum shifted slightly, words forming and fading like smoke. The shadows leaned closer, crawling up the wall, stretching with impossible grace. I exhaled slowly. The staircase seemed to pulse beneath me, alive with rhythm I could not match. The footsteps continued, echoing softly, patient, inevitable. Air pressed against my skin, cool and damp. The walls smelled faintly of old paint, mingling with the hum in my chest. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted with presence unseen. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. Yet the echo of steps remained. The shadows shifted with a life of their own, stretching, bending, patient, alone, aware, tense. And the staircase held me in its quiet rhythm, the echoes pressing against my mind, impossible to shake. The bus stop stood alone, a worn bench under a flickering streetlight. The air smelled of wet asphalt and cold metal, thick with the approaching fog. Each breath felt heavy, damp, carrying the scent of rain yet to fall. The fog rolled in, fast and silent, curling around the lampposts and the empty bench. It clung to my clothes, to my hair, pressing cool against my skin. The world shrank to a small circle of pale light, the edges swallowed by white mist. I felt eyes on me. Nothing visible, only weight in the air, patient and persistent. The shadows deepened at the edges of my vision, curling along the street, folding into themselves. Across the street, a figure appeared. Tall, thin, unmoving at first, pale against the fog. Then it vanished, swallowed entirely by the mist, leaving only a faint disturbance in the air. I shifted on the bench. The damp pressed into my jacket, cold and grounding. A soft rustle of leaves reached my ears, though the wind was still. Each heartbeat echoed, loud and hollow in the quiet night. The shadow returned, closer this time. Its shape bent strangely, impossible, patient. It lingered at the edge of the fog, a pale presence I could almost touch. I held my breath. The wet asphalt reflected the dim light, broken by the mist curling over it. The silence pressed against my ears, sharp, almost loud in its intensity. I exhaled slowly. The shadow faded again, leaving nothing but fog and the faint smell of wet earth. The street seemed endless, hollow, unaware of the bench or me, alone, uneasy, with the sense that the fog held more than air, and the shadows waited, patient, just beyond reach. I rose from the bench. Each step pressed heavier than the last. The mist curled around my boots, cold and damp. Regret lingered quietly, soft and persistent, like the shadow I could not see. The bus stop faded behind me. The fog swallowed it, and the night returned to stillness. Yet the memory of eyes, of weight in the air, pressed quietly in my chest, alone, lost in white, and aware that something waited just beyond vision, patient and unreadable. The night was still. The air smelled damp and earthy, thick with frost and fallen leaves. A tree stood ahead, its branches trembling violently, though the wind was absent. The leaves whispered, soft, human-like, curling around my ears. A low, subtle vibration hummed through the ground beneath my boots. It pulsed faintly, rhythmic, almost like the heartbeat of the earth itself. I stepped closer. The rough bark pressed into my palms, cold and slightly wet. The whispering leaves brushed my face, brushing against my hair, carrying words I could not understand. Something moved in the branches, a figure, pale and still, almost blending with the twisted wood. I blinked. It vanished. The tree shivered again. Shadows stretched along the roots, curling into shapes that leaned toward me. The ground pulsed beneath my feet, slow and insistent, pressing, grounding, unsettling. I inhaled slowly. The scent of damp leaves and soil filled my nostrils, sharp and vivid. The night air pressed against my skin, cool, almost alive. I moved closer, curiosity heavier than fear. The branches trembled with a voice-like rustle, a whispering chant just beyond understanding. The figure did not return, but I felt its presence, patient and unseen. Each step made the leaves shiver more, the tree seeming to pulse in response. Shadows twisted around the roots, clinging, stretching, impossible to track with eyes alone. The hum of the ground underfoot pressed softly into my chest. I froze. The tree seemed aware, waiting, bending toward me in quiet observation. The air tasted of wet earth and something faintly metallic, sharp and pressing. Alone, curious, afraid. I stepped back slowly, eyes tracing the trembling branches. The night returned to stillness. The leaves settled. The ground stilled its pulse, yet the feeling remained that something had watched, patient, unseen, and waiting for the next blink. Rain slid down the glass, soft and constant, pressing against the panes. The apartment smelled of wet concrete and warm wood, heavy and still. Each drop tapped a rhythm that echoed quietly in the room. The window pane flickered. A pale light danced across the glass, though no lamp, no car, no streetlight shone outside. It pulsed, soft and irregular, like a heartbeat just beyond understanding. Shadows stretched across the walls. They mimicked me, bending when I leaned, curling when I twisted. Each movement I made became theirs, slow, deliberate, almost sentient. The hum in the air deepened, low and steady. It pressed against my ears, vibrating through the floor, brushing against my skin. The scent of rain mixed with the faint tang of metal, sharp and near. I stepped closer to the window. The flickering light reflected in the wet glass, painting the room in pale, shifting shapes. Each reflection seemed alive, whispering quietly in rhythm with the hum. A soft rustle reached me, though the air was still. Curtains trembled, shadows bending to shapes unformed. I blinked, and the reflections twisted, impossible angles stretching across the walls. The room felt smaller. The light pressed in, the shadows lingered, following every shift. My breath fogged the glass, soft and fleeting. Merging with the rain outside, alone, curious, uneasy, every heartbeat echoed. Matched by the subtle flicker above, the shadows remained, patient, quiet, watching. The flicker slowed, pulsing irregularly, leaving only anticipation in its wake. The room hummed, soft and constant, like it held secrets just beyond reach. I moved back from the window. The rain's tap softened, blending with the low hum of the apartment. The light stilled. The shadows stayed, long and watchful, alone, aware of something just beyond sight, and left with the quiet dread of wonder, of a room that breathed with its own hidden rhythm. The town felt familiar. Streetlights dripped pale pools of light across the wet pavement. The air smelled of damp brick and cold stone. Then I saw it. An alley I had walked past countless times, yet never noticed. Fog spilled from its mouth, curling and twisting like smoke in a glass jar. Shapes shifted in the mist. Long, formless, vanishing when I blinked. The edges of the alley seemed alive, breathing in silence. I stepped closer. The fog clung to my coat, damp and cold. Every footstep pressed into the mist, leaving nothing behind. Something moved again. A shadow between the walls, pale and fleeting. I leaned forward, curiosity pressing against fear. It was gone. Only the mist remained, swirling, whispering against the bricks. The alley felt endless, a corridor that stretched beyond sight. A soft echo followed me. Footsteps, faint but matching my pace. I turned. Nothing. Only the fog, thick and swallowing. The alley seemed to pulse. Each inhalation of air carried the scent of rain and rusted metal. My breath fogged in the cold, blending with the shadows that clung to the edges. I reached the mouth of the alley. The fog retracted slightly as if letting me pass. Shapes lingered just beyond vision, teasing, impossible. Alone I walked on the familiar streets. Yet the echo stayed, soft and constant, pressing against my back. The town had not changed, but I had. The alley existed now in memory, in unease, in the lingering fog between footsteps. I kept walking. The shadows did not follow. But the echo, it never left. Isolation settled around me like a second skin. The air tasted colder, heavier, carrying the weight of the unseen. And I knew, somewhere behind me, the alley waited. Rain fell in steady sheets, washing the road in silver reflections. The asphalt glistened under the dim glow of a distant streetlight. Fog drifted low, curling around the tires of passing cars I couldn't see. I walked alone, The cold air pressed against my skin, damp and sharp. Each breath tasted of wet earth and rain-soaked asphalt. Then I saw it. A pale silhouette standing in the fog, still and impossibly thin. It did not move, yet it seemed aware of me. I blinked. The shape vanished. But the footprints remained, etched into the wet road, too defined to ignore. The wind carried whispers, soft, unintelligible, brushing my ears like a sigh. I leaned closer, straining to hear, but the words slipped away. The fog thickened. Every shadow around me stretched unnaturally, folding and twisting against the glow of streetlights. The world shrank to the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and uneven in the silence. I took a cautious step forward. The footprints ahead were fresh, glistening with rainwater. My fingers brushed the mist, cold and damp, pulling at the edges of my awareness. A subtle movement flickered at the corner of my vision. The silhouette, gone again, yet the fog hinted it lingered just beyond sight. I could feel its presence, a soft pressure against the edge of reality. The rain slowed. Drops lingered on the leaves of nearby trees, trembling like tiny glass beads. The whispers returned, softer this time, almost like breath carried through the mist. I stopped. The footprints ended abruptly. Nothing but the fog, the wet road, and the silence that followed. The air tasted heavier now, charged with something unseen. A shiver passed through me, running down my spine to my feet. I wanted to turn, to flee, but something held me still. Fear and awe intertwined. The pale silhouette, the whispers, the footprints, they existed in a space I could not name. I understood nothing, yet my senses screamed that it was real. The fog began to drift away slowly. Streetlights returned to their usual dim glow. The world exhaled. I walked on. Alone, but marked by the memory of what lingered in the rain. The footprints, the whispers, they remained in my mind even as the road grew familiar again. The wind carried a final sigh, a whisper fading into the distance, and I was left with the quiet awe of seeing something beyond the ordinary. The room was still. Outside, night pressed against the windows, dark and thick. I could feel the chill settling into my bones, damp and slow. Shadows shifted. Not with the light, not with the wind. They moved on their own, rustling like fabric against skin. I breathed quietly. Each inhale tasted of cold air and faint dust. The rustling followed me, soft, almost curious. I stepped closer. The shadows darted, slipping from the corner of my eye. Every movement felt deliberate, yet impossible to catch. A hum filled the air, low, steady, vibrating beneath my ribs. I could feel it more than hear it, a resonance inside the walls and floor. The floorboards creaked lightly under my feet. I froze, thinking it might be another presence, but nothing appeared, only the shifting darkness at the edges. I reached toward a shadow. My fingers passed through empty air, but the rustle lingered. It recoiled, then stretched thin across the walls like smoke. The light from the lamp flickered. A thin, pale glow exposed a shape that was gone the next instant. I could sense it watching me, following, bending with the shadows. The hum deepened. It was steady now, filling every corner, binding the shadows with some quiet, unspoken rhythm. I stepped back. The shadows quivered, gathering briefly, then scattered into the corners of the room, always just out of focus, teasing the edge of perception. A soft draft brushed my face. It smelled faintly of rain and old paper. The room seemed larger, emptier, yet the presence lingered, subtle, unseen. I sank into a chair. The hum softened, almost like a lullaby for the restless darkness. The rustling slowed, folding into silence, but I could still feel the movement at the edge of vision. Alone, yet not alone. The shadows pulsed with quiet life, the hum threading the room like an invisible tether. I closed my eyes briefly. When I opened them, everything seemed normal, except for the lingering unease that whispered across my skin and settled in my chest. The night continued. Shadows waiting, breathing, shifting softly in the corners. The hum persisted, quiet but certain, and I was left with the subtle tension of knowing they were there, even if I could never fully see them. The night was thick. Rain clung to the windshield, cold and steady. The bridge loomed ahead, half hidden in fog that rolled like slow smoke. I pressed forward. The tires hummed against wet asphalt. Light flickered along the railing, pale and unsteady, then vanished. The bridge. It seemed to blink. One moment solid, the next, almost gone, swallowed by mist. I breathed shallow, the hum of the engine blending with the whisper of fog. It rose from the river below, curling like lungs exhaling. My reflection shimmered in the water. But it was wrong. The shape shifted when I blinked, the eyes in the glass too wide, too still. I gripped the wheel tighter. The bridge beneath me trembled, not with weight but with something alive. The air smelled of cold metal and wet stone with a faint hint of something older. Faint smoke or decay. The railings shimmered. Edges faded in and out of perception. Each blink of my eyes distorted the planks beneath me, like the world itself couldn't decide what was real. A chill ran up my spine. The fog pressed against the windshield, dense and slow. I could feel it in my hair, on my skin, like the river itself exhaled through the mist. The reflection twisted again. My face lingered a moment too long, then stretched, pale, almost smiling. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. The tires whispered on the wet wood. Echoed footsteps below, or was it my own heartbeat? Shadows of the bridge danced across the water. They moved independently, bending toward me, then recoiling into the fog. I slowed. The bridge ahead pulsed with a strange rhythm, flickering between presence and absence. I could feel the hum through the soles of my shoes, vibration from a world just beyond comprehension. The fog thickened. It clung to the rearview mirror, to my eyelashes, to the small spaces around the dashboard. Everything smelled damp, of wet iron and soil. I blinked again. The bridge had vanished. Nothing but black water and fog where the structure should be. Yet my tires hummed and my shadow stretched long and thin, bending on the mist. I exhaled slowly, heart loud in the stillness. The reflection stared from the water, face pale and unnatural, watching, patient. The bridge flickered back, solid yet alien. I could feel the weight of the night, the disbelief crawling along my arms and neck. Each breath seemed louder than the last, each heartbeat a drum against the hollow world. I moved forward. Fog swirled around me, curling over railings, sliding under tires like liquid smoke. The reflection stayed, following, bending, shifting, a silent witness to something I could not name. And then the bridge. It stayed, yet everything felt wrong. The mist, the river, the reflected face, all vibrating with a quiet, impossible life. I drove on. The fog parted slowly, but the memory lingered, heavy in the air, pressing against my skin like the world itself whispered disbelief and fear in the quiet night. Rain hammered the roof, hard, a steady percussion that shook the walls with its rhythm. I sat alone, the room smelling of damp wood and cold stone. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching and bending like liquid. They moved slowly, independently, slipping across the walls. The rain changed, almost imperceptibly. A whisper threaded through the hammering drops. Words I could not understand, but they brushed my ears, curling into my thoughts. I felt it first as a pull, a subtle tug in my chest, urging me toward the window, each step heavier than the last. The floor beneath my feet hummed faintly, a vibration that seemed to echo the words in the rain. The glass fogged under my breath. Pale light from the street outside flickered against it, shadows dancing, drawn to the wet pane. I pressed my hand against the cold surface. It quivered beneath my fingertips, as though alive, breathing with the storm. The whispers grew louder, but still undecipherable. A soft cadence, like a language I once knew in dreams. I shivered, the cold damp of the window seeping into my skin, but I could not look away. Outside, the night was thick with rain and mist. Shapes moved in the periphery. Not human, not entirely, vanishing when I blinked, reforming when I looked elsewhere. The shadows behind me stretched, slipping across the walls in silent rustling. Each movement a breath, a pulse, a subtle signal that I was not alone. I leaned closer to the glass. The rain whispered again, sharper this time, the words threading into my mind, pulling me toward some truth I could not reach. The air inside the room tasted of wet stone. metallic and heavy, pressing against my lungs with each inhale. A faint hum rose beneath the drumming rain, resonating through my chest, my skull. I tried to step back. The shadows pressed closer, folding around corners, wrapping the room in soft, moving darkness. The whispering rain followed me, an endless chant of something forgotten or something yet to come. I stood, frozen in place. The window framed the night like a pale eye. The fogged glass blurred the shapes outside, but I could feel them, shifting, watching, waiting. The rain continued, drumming, whispering, and I felt the isolation settle in like cold stone. Alone, yet surrounded, pulled between the wet night and the shadows of my own room. I did not move. I could not. The whispering rain held me still, its language unknowable, its presence undeniable, and as the storm pressed on, the shadows swirled closer, and the hum of the room, the rain, the whispers, folded me into a quiet dread that would not release. The night stretched endlessly. I remained, staring, listening, feeling the pull of something beyond the glass, beyond the rain, beyond comprehension. And the whispers lingered, soft, unbroken, a language that spoke only to fear, to isolation, to the quiet, aching dread of being utterly alone. The road should have been familiar. Every turn I knew, every shadow mapped in memory, but tonight it was wrong. The trees leaned closer, their branches scraping the sky, rustling against each other like whispered secrets. Fog rolled low, thick and heavy, clinging to the asphalt in my skin. It smelled damp, earthy, almost metallic. Streetlights flickered above. Like dying stars, their pale light trembling across the road. The edges of the fog glowed faintly, shapes forming, dissolving, never staying long enough to understand. I walked slowly, each step muted by the soft mist. Leaves crunched faintly beneath my shoes, though no wind stirred the branches. A hum lingered in the air, like a distant engine or a voice trapped behind glass. Then I heard it. My name. Soft. From behind. A voice that was mine and not mine. I stopped. The road stretched empty. Nothing moved but the fog, curling and spilling across the ground. The air felt thick, almost alive, pressing against my chest, pulling me forward, dragging my feet through shadows. Every blink shifted the scene. Streetlights twitched. Branches trembled. The fog thickened, almost solid, veiling the familiar, twisting it into something unknowable. A soft rustle to my left. I turned slowly. Nothing. Only the fog coiling like smoke, whispering its own indecipherable words. I tried to breathe. The mist clung to my lungs, wet and cold, filling my chest with the scent of rain and decay. Each step forward was heavier than the last. The road seemed endless, each familiar turn now foreign, a labyrinth that knew me better than I knew it. Another sound, a soft footfall behind me. I dared not look. The voice again, closer, but still no body, no shadow, only the echo of something unseen. The streetlights flickered faster now, pale bursts of light and darkness. The fog shifted with them, forming shapes that stretched, leaned, and vanished before I could focus. I wanted to run, but the road resisted, pulling me along its crooked path. A cold brush against my arm, though the air was still. A breath at my ear or the wind? I could not tell. The trees bent in closer, their dark limbs like fingers, reaching and grasping, scraping against each other with a soft, skeletal whisper. The mist curled around my ankles, dragging me toward the last turn. I reached it. The corner should have led home. The house should have been there, but it was not. Just fog, and shadows that moved of their own accord, and the voice fading now, lingering in the hush between streetlights. I stopped, alone. The road stretched out behind me, unbroken and empty. Yet I felt eyes on me from every direction. The hum in the air rose, soft, insistent, like a warning I could not understand. I turned again. Nothing. Only fog. Only the cold, moist air pressing against my skin. The last turn. It should have been familiar. But it was gone, and I walked on, through the pale light, through the creeping fog. Pulled forward by a road that no longer belonged to me, quiet terror settled in my chest. Unresolved, heavy, and the night whispered on.